All right, we are live. Good day, my crypto friends. It's a pleasure to see you today. We are here with Caesar, who is with EOSocal, one of the top block producer candidates for EOS, the upcoming launch. And we have the pleasure to talk to him today, and we're going to talk about the EOSocal block producer, specifically what sets them apart, and then just EOS in general. And I spoke with Caesar a little bit. Super interesting character. So this will be a fun conversation today. Caesar, in checking out your LinkedIn profile, I went all the way to the bottom and I saw under education, I saw helicopter pilot and airplane pilot or fixed wing pilot. Tell me a little bit about that. That's just such an interesting little nugget to start off on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first place, thanks for having us. I appreciate it. I picked it up as a hobby. I at the time I picked it up maybe 10 years ago. I was running a business and managed to, escape right around 2 p.m. where, out the back door. And then I figured, hey, let me pick up a hobby. I started flying Cessnas, just fixed wing. Here in Southern California, it's a busy airspace. So, a little nerve wracking getting in there, getting thrown into the busy airspace. But I ended up having not too many hours. I'm still a bit green when it comes to flying, but I have about 150 hours or so in the fixed wing Cessna. And then I figured, hey, let me jump into the helicopters. That looks fun. So I started flying a Robinson R-22. I got about 60 hours there. Not quite licensed on that side of things, but I do have my license on the fixed wing, and I plan to continue doing it. It's a nice way to vent, escape from the heat of the office and go have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very technical as well, especially flying the helicopters. That's impressive. That's really cool. And let's get into EOSocal, and I've been through your guys' website and seen all the projects that you're working on. What do you think is the most important project or the most important way that EOSocal gives back to the community, or what sets you apart?
Sure. So I think what sets us apart is the fact that we have a genuine desire to see this come through, see the whole ecosystem. And I heard Thomas Cox on your show, and he described it as a society. And I see the same. I see this as ultimately being a new way, basically trying to prove a new model of society. And from our perspective, we just want to see that happen. And if that means becoming a block producer, taking some of those rewards and being able to increase our ability and budget to continue contributing. Otherwise, if we end up not being block producers, that's not going to put an end to our efforts, which is the awesome thing. We're self-funded. I sold a business, a couple of businesses, my latest about 5-6 years ago. And I ended up with enough capital to say, hey, maybe I can start focusing on certain things that are more fulfilling, more of a legacy thing, not necessarily geared towards, wealth generation. So I took some capital and said, what would be fulfilling? And around that time, I had gotten into finance, trying to invest some of this capital, and learned about, Austrian economics and the libertarian philosophies. And from that side, ultimately ended up in Bitcoin. And from my technical side of things, since we were developing certain technologies, that led us to blockchain and ultimately, Bitcoin and whatnot. So from both ends of my, the finance and the technologies, I ended up in the cryptocurrency. So we got thrown in here. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized, hey, this is going to be a technology that can make a difference in the way people live, and it does have a lot of roots in the libertarian movement, where it empowers people. It takes away reliance on a intermediary, whatever that person might be or entity. And from our perspective as EOSocal, we want to do whatever we can to help the launch and the long-term success of the chain. And that might be from many directions, whether it's just making sure that we contribute, from the block production, if we can help there. Also, we're contributing, right? We built a tool to help block producers be transparent towards the token holders, we're also building dApps, and I hope that I can follow Dan Larimer's ability to just create some really cool apps that help people all around the world. And we announced recently Trade Stuff, which we hope will allow people to monetize the otherwise demonetized. So basically grab any item in your household instead of having a garage sale. Hey, maybe you can use that as purchasing power. So those kinds of things where if we can just continue building cool apps and contribute any way we can, we're happy. And hopefully if we are block producers, and that just means we have a bigger budget to continue doing what we're doing, expand on that, continue building dApps. We ultimately want to have a couple C++ guys here going at it with these smart contracts and helping other people, mostly anybody that might have a similar philosophy that says, hey, I got an idea, this might help either the community or just in general in these fronts. Then we can say, oh, okay, well, we'll build a smart contract, or maybe we'll give you funding. We got a whiteboard here. We can, contribute from design and architecture, all that good stuff. So, overall, it's just the big question in our mind is, what can we contribute and where is our value best placed?
Yeah, see, you guys have a very altruistic approach, and I like the philosophy and the feeling behind what you guys are doing, because it is this feeling of doing it because it's the proper thing for the community and the society and globally.
Absolutely.
Everyone. And it's a big thing, and you guys feels like you have this bigger picture view that you're trying to push forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the dApp specific, or specifically the template that you created for block producers to be transparent with their funds, I think is a great idea, and that's a great little tool that's gonna tag on, and I like that. And then I saw also that it's almost like you're running sort of an incubator for dApps and projects that want to be built on top of EOS.
That is right. Yeah.
And so that looked interesting as well. And you've got experience. You've self-funded, built a few companies, and then sold them. And so coming from that background of being able to build companies, and then all of your background as far as the as EOS goes at this point, it's going to be that's a really useful thing that you're putting out in the community. Basically, this startup.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
it's cool.
We feel I'm not sure if you ever seen that whole idea of ikigai, where it's I forget where it originates, maybe India, where it says, okay, if you take your passion, something that'll give you fulfillment, and then you take your skill set, and maybe even take a component that might generate income, put it all together. At the center of it is what you should be doing. I mean, in an ideal world, not everybody is lucky enough to immediately, be able to quit their job and jump onto something fulfilling and expect to make income. But if you could build towards being in that position, then I think that's where fulfillment comes from. Where you might be helping, you might be fulfilled personally, fulfilling your legacy, dying happy, basically. And if you can make income at the same time, then what else it would be better. So that's the way I see our position here, is that we might be able to make some income if we make some cool apps. Obviously, if we're block producers, that generates income. If we can help this whole community as a whole, or even yesterday I was on the phone with a gentleman, and he was like, I got this great idea, and I feel that it'll help people locally. I said, awesome. Those are the things that we can easily help with. As you said, we do have experience all the way, the full stack from initially designing and doing sprints on the whole flow of whatever it is, an app or a product, and then taking that all the way through to development, the front end, the back end. And what I would like to do is to be able to continue growing our operation to where, we're just taking on these cool projects that are contributing as described. And, if we grow the team here, have a bunch of front end, back end developers, have people helping with the design, that would be my ideal situation. I mean, that would be my happy place, really, is to be able to just create really cool products on EOS. And I'm very excited to see how the whole ecosystem plays out, where EOS aims to be able to function as a society where, the three branches that Cox described on your show last time, and aim to mimic, a functional society where we can resolve disputes. If there's any type of fraud, you might steal my tokens. You have the block producers that can help revert some of that based on the arbitration. And I'm very excited to see how this whole thing would play out. It's cool in theory and in articles and, in my mind, but how is it going to play out? That's what is very exciting. And, I know come June, some of the features might not be there entirely, but as they start rolling out, we wonder how products might be able to evolve based on the model. For example, some of the apps that we're creating, we're realizing that you can totally disrupt existing business models where, currently any company that's in the middle charging a fee, I mean, I think that those guys are gone. And not only that, but it's a level of disruption. One guy's going to say, hey, we're cheaper than, existing company A. And then here comes another guy on EOS that says, well, I'm even cheaper than that. And then it just gets cheap to the point where they keep disrupting each other. And then suddenly it's free. And then come another group that figures out how to pay you, Mm-hmm. So, for example, Steam, right? So, you originally you might have to pay to subscribe to something or maybe buy an app. Then later it's free. Then here comes Steam, and now you get paid for it. So we feel that one very exciting thing is the near future where just traditional business models are disrupted, and now people have access to central. Well, they're decentralized, but one single database for everything. So imagine a future where if you want to look for a job, you don't have to, number one, you don't have to pay, but you might find a database where everybody posts their jobs, whether you're the lister of a job or you're seeking a job. If there's one central database and it's free to join, how much value would that be to everybody? Where, as a job seeker, now you don't have to go to 10 different places. If we can have everything on the blockchain at one point, and even if it's various blockchains, they can intercommunicate to share that data. Even it's not a one solution. EOS might be one among many projects that can intercommunicate and share data on free open source databases that will provide a tremendous value, not only demonetized, but it'll help just in that example on the job front, makes it much easier to find the job. Me as an employer, sometimes I have a very hard time finding people and qualified people in the at that. So the exciting thing for us is just picturing what the business models are going to look like in the not too distant future as we see it.
Yeah, and that what you're talking about there with the jobs as an example is really a cool example of the way that I conceptualize it. As we operate best as humans in these smaller groups. So 5 to maybe 20 to 30 people, which is the size of a traditional tribe. And that's where the great thing about that size amount of people is you know your neighbors, who they are, what they do, what they can offer, what they're not good at. But the key there is this transparency of information and this accountability for how we act. And how EOS changes is it puts this tribe feeling and this information on a grand scale. So now all of a sudden we can almost have some of that same feeling, but globally. And with your job example, we're looking at being able to, all the information's right there. Everyone who needs a job and everyone who's offering a job is just kind of there for free, and the information is open. So it's almost it's a really interesting shift. And like you said, it's not just jobs, it's everything. And it's really changing. And I love the philosophy behind it. I love the idea of personal freedom and yeah. So yeah, so I really like that you guys are philosophy based. I like that that you have a kind of a North Star that's pointing in a direction that's for the good of everyone. And you know, that's one of my favorite things, besides the specific things that you are doing as EOSocal. One of my favorite things about you guys is just the general vision. And I think that's really important right now, because it can point a lot of different ways. And so, yeah, so appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. So I would, you know, from our perspective, it seems like Dan Larimer has similar philosophies, which is what attracted us most to this project. You know, there's, as you know, in this space, there's so many projects that'll make your head spin, you know, there's, and there's some great teams, you know, for example, you know, you still have Vitalik trying to solve on his front, and, you know, very smart guy. He's paved the way for many things. And you have other great projects that are, you know, have equally scalable, at least they propose scalable solutions. And what to me differentiates EOS is, you know, that it works as a whole ecosystem. So it's not just, you know, we figured out the consensus algorithm. It's many things that, and, you know, borrowing Dan's words, is, you know, he says we were already solving things that people haven't even began to think about. And, you know, that's why this is not just a consensus algorithm. It's, you know, it's got the dispute resolution, it's got the constitution. It really is a structure for a society. And what attracted us to this is that it's not just a technical movement. It's a philosophical movement. And you know, Dan has a certain vision which many people don't really capture when he speaks of that. Like, for example, his you know, one of his mission statements is preserving life, liberty, and property, or securing life, liberty, and property. And that alone, you know, if you think about that, and I've heard him say on a few interviews, is he's developing this to allow people to improve their own lives by being able to preserve and secure, you know, property, for example. And one example is the DApp that we recently announced, Trade Stuff, which allows people to monetize the otherwise demonetized. And that is one example of preserving, you know, your property and securing your property by not relying on, you know, anybody else. You know, if I'm sovereign in my ability to carry value, that's not, you know, for example, in fiat money, I might have $1 in my hand, but do I really have value here? Because I have no say in what the future value of this dollar is going to be. You know, if it gets inflated, you know, there's no cap, there's no inflation cap, there's no accountability on inflation. So if I have a dollar back in 1970 and $1 today, I mean, I don't know the exact figure, but it's something like, you know, under 5% of the buying power in my dollar that I earned, you know, in 1970. So there's no ability to save. There's no ability to preserve my property. It devalues. So that's one thing that I think is just, you know, beautiful, is the the word that comes to mind, is that it allows sovereignty, you know, in the same way that Bitcoin allows somebody to hold value. You know, right now I know it's quite volatile in price, but the idea is that there's nobody creating inflation to devalue my money. And even though EOS does have inflation, it's you know the where that inflated where those inflated funds are used are voiced by the community. So the community can say, well, you know, right now the code proposes 5% inflation, 1% goes to the block producers, 4% goes to community benefit. We all feel that you know, it's too high or too low, so everyone can change. The people have control, and that doesn't exist in society today, where, you know, it's all the decisions are made behind closed doors. So this opens a whole level of participation, transparency, ability to provingly say, hey, I voted, whether my way went or not. I had a provably a fair vote. I can look through the code and audit it and say, look, here's my vote. There's a fair tally. I might have lost, but I feel okay that I have an equal say. You know, my vote is heard, right? Because in current society, I mean, unless you go take a bag full of money and go into some politician's office, and you know, there's, you know, we don't get to vote where the massive inflation gets spent, and some of it is just, yeah. I was hearing Ron Paul ask in some video on YouTube. He asks some guy on the Fed. He goes, you know, can you tell me where this amount of funds went? No. Okay, what's your position? Well, you know, I'm the head of this. Okay, so if you can, then who can? I don't know.
Yeah. There's
no answers. So that's why he's always saying, hey, audit the Fed. But, you know, the beauty here is transparency. It's accountability. And to be able to be part of it without asking permission, right? This is all everybody's self-appointed. For example, we chose to come out as block producers without having to ask permission. We just wanted to contribute. And it's a contribution-based system where anybody can, you know, like yourself, you know, you chose to get into the community, start your channel, and no permission, you know, and that's the beauty of it. Nobody has to be assigned to anything. You can just contribute. You know, you do have the voting for the delegates, but there's many ways to contribute, whether it's, you know, just contributing for meetups, developing apps, developing tools, even proposing some of these worker proposal, whatever they are, a service or product or an app or a tool. You know, that alone is going to be super interesting. If you think about it, there's 4 times more funds going into funding these things than there is to fund the block producers. So that's a tremendous amount of funding, you know, 4% of 1 billion tokens annually. And that rises as the percentages rise, but the amount of tokens rise as the total quantity rises. And it's going to be interesting to see what that tremendous amount of funds do, you know, and we get to vote for that as token holders. So that alone is going to be awesome to see, you know, what services are going to be funded. And, you know, maybe even Brandon's YouTube channel, advocate of EOS, gets funded.
Yeah,
you never know.
You never know. Yeah. Well, that's, yeah. And you know what you're talking about with the funding is really interesting to me, because I have vested interest in funding. I've got 2 projects that I'm working on. I'm working with a company called EOS, and it's a social media app that we're trying to launch onto EOS eventually. And then I'm working with FitBlocks, which is a fitness-based rewards social media app that's down in Los Angeles as well. So,
interesting.
So from that perspective, from working on these dApps and trying to be part of the community as much as possible, and it's almost like we're all in this creative process trying to figure out how this works all together. So for me, just hitting on what you were saying, it's cool that EOSocal is somewhere that we look and that other dApps look towards for some direction or some, like you said, whiteboarding, or it's almost like an incubator you guys are running there that gives us a nice comforting place to lean on when everyone's just kind of making it up as they go and figuring it out as fast as possible. It's a great creative process.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool.
I've heard a bit about EOS, and it sounds like a great concept. I've got to see some of your guys' slides that have been put together, and it sounds like a great project. I mean, I think that's one of those things that could easily be funded. Whether it's, if we're elected, we can talk to you guys. If not, there's many other block producers that could fund it, and further. If it does provide a community benefit, hey, package it up and submit a proposal for that. There's so much funds in there. It's worth a shot there. And if, as a backup plan, you could always talk to VCs that are pretty much throwing their money into the space, especially once picture 6 months from now when all these dApps that are waiting to roll out that have been working hard developing, once those are out and you have one of these dApps that gain momentum and, wow, this dApp is, top 100 on the App Store, and it's decentralized. Wow. And then suddenly you're starting to see a bunch of them popping out as they gain market share and they're decentralized. I think at that point, people start saying, well, decentralized, what do you mean? Let me look into this. EOS, well, let me learn about that. So I think, even though EOS in market share is a leader, I think relatively it's unknown. Some people ask me, hey, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a supporter of EOS. Like, what's that? So they barely know what blockchain is, and they heard of Bitcoin, but I think it's not going to be long before certain products become successful and do start competing with, call it the next Facebook, the next Uber, the next Airbnb, start decentralizing and disintermediating, taking out the middleman, and those become successful. Imagine a near future, as I see it, where not only the top dApps are decentralized, whether it be on EOS or other, but imagine, fast forward more than 6 months, call it a year, call it 2 years. Imagine that even companies, call it even a Facebook, where not necessarily as an app, but as a company being such a large company. Imagine the NASDAQ having another set of companies that are decentralized compete for just being the most successful companies. So as soon as you have, some of the largest tech companies be decentralized, I think that's when it's a new chapter in society where, imagine the top 10 companies in the US as far as tech companies, imagine them being decentralized, having a decentralized ownership, decentralized governance. I think that's when the floodgates of this whole model starts unleashing. So that's interesting to see come.
Yeah, and it feels like it's going to happen really quickly as well. I mean, this is so many people working as fast as they can and creatively as possible right now. I just can't wait to see what's going on just a month from now.
Exactly.
A year from now. It's really amazing times.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about? I saw something about you're storing in two places. You're storing. Why don't you talk about the storage and how you're keeping that secure there at EOSocal? I think is it there's some sort of hardware that's a hardware backup. Is that right?
Sure. So from the block production side?
Yeah, from the block production side.
Got it. So right now we've been redesigning based on a lot of the community, there's a lot of community experts that are coming together and proposing security structures. And, right now, Alex is part of these communities that are saying, this is how we propose. And Alex is going to be the better one to describe the details, but from a high level, there's a public facing node, and then you have a block producing node behind that, where the public facing node, in case it were to get attacked, call it DDoS attack, it's not going to affect the block producing node. So there's different layers of security, and right now there's various approaches to that, and there's debates going on, and we don't have much time left, but it's getting to the point where it's solidifying as far as the architecture. And there's different layers to make sure that your producing nodes are not exposed. They don't have a public endpoint. And further deeper into the stack, we would have a backup. Might be a warm backup where it's not producing, but it could be redundant in its ability to just turn on as a full node immediately. We're going to start off with cloud-based solutions just to allow us to quickly scale, because we're concerned with going all bare metal right off the bat. And when you do bare metal and you host here, there's challenges as far as scalability. So imagine having to order parts and wait. You can't wait. You got to scale. So what we want to do is have our flexibility on the cloud to be able to scale, and then we can start creating backup systems and redundancy to try to diversify off the cloud. There's a lot of the community wants to see a little bit of diversification from the cloud. Not all block producers want to be on the cloud. That sort of puts too much too much reliance on the cloud.
Point of failure, yeah.
Exactly. So Alex is part of these discussions, and right now he was going to join here today, but he got pulled into a disaster recovery a group that is going through scenarios of if this happens, let's play out as if it was really occurring. How do we how do we react to this stuff? Recently, Dan in some of the chats suggested that if a certain number of block producers get disabled for whatever reason, you might have to pause block production and have everybody, help restore and then continue. And, the delegated proof of stake is not new. It's ran successfully under Steam, as you well know, and BitShares before that. And it's the same algorithm with just added features. So it's, a lot of people say, well, it's not going to work. And, but it's already a proven model. It's just a matter of how do we make it work here on EOS, and how do we make sure that it's successful with, being able to support not just one app. In the case of Steam, that's all that it focuses on, is just the article module. Here you can have, eventually millions of apps. So, and I think at one point thousands of chains. So, imagine a block producer not having to just run one chain, but having to manage, 500, 1,000 chains. And this is all new. I'm not aware of any other chains that one block producer operates multiple chains where they interoperate for scalability. So a lot going on there. Very, very innovative approach to this whole thing. And From our perspective, the community is very collaborative, as Cox also said on your shows, that everybody's just overwhelmingly supportive of each other, and hopefully that lasts even past the elections.
Mm-hmm.
But we're part of the community. We're supporting others and getting support from others, and that results in assistance in designing our systems to make sure that they do support the security, and they have adequate backup and storage and all that.
Yeah, that you touched on the disaster recovery there. That's an interesting thing that I haven't thought of or heard too much about yet. It sounds like it's new. You're actually having a meeting right now regarding it. So is there two facets to that? Is there like a EOSocal specific disaster recovery and then like a global disaster recovery, or is this about like the entire chain and how to remedy some sort of full chain disaster?
Yeah, so it's not our initiative. It's I believe Cox is the moderator there,
mm-hmm.
and it involves many of the block producers. And we're so close to launch that the whole idea here is that we have some experience in resolving some of these potential disasters, whether it be an attack, whether it be, imagine a percentage of our block producers being dependent on, Amazon East or whatever area, and that goes out. So, how do we not wait until we're live to figure out how to deal with it? Mm-hmm. Let's run through these scenarios now. That way, we're prepared for it, and we have a little bit of experience with it. So, from what I've gathered so far, there's a few different possibilities of disaster, and the group is running through each of those to figure out how to react to them. And, they're not very scripted. I think it's like, boom, this just happened. What do you do? And the group is sitting there going, shuffling, trying to figure out, do we pause the chain? Do we keep it going? How do we, who's going to run to help this guy? Does he have backup? Does he have other nodes available in case maybe just one of his nodes went out, maybe a region? So it's just to make sure that people are not panicking come a potential issue once we go live.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's why a lot of and Thomas Cox says himself that one of the most important parts of voting for block producers is diversity among all the different countries and having it spread out both governmentally, what type of situation they're in there, and then geographically. So that's something that is for me personally, voting for block producers and be one of my most important ways that I vote is spreading that out. Aside from that, what do you think is maybe the second most important or your first most important way that you're going to vote for block producers?
Yeah, so I agree. I think the most important is diversity geographically. Also, do they fall within different governmental jurisdictions? Yeah. Also, what we touched upon is we want to make sure not everybody's on the cloud, so maybe some variety there.
Yeah, hardware, I would say some hardware diversity, okay.
Absolutely. Also, from an experience standpoint, there are some great leaders that have been, tireless, and I think there's different values. So you might want, there's very highly technical block producers that, that bring that aspect of value. Then you might have other block producers that bring, they're just very involved in community. They're in every single telegram. They're in every, they're actively discussing every governance issue, tireless. They're on Twitter. You just sometimes wonder how the heck do they manage to do this stuff? It's like 1 a.m. I get a telegram. I'm like, don't you sleep? But, so you might have somebody that's very involved in the community and developing, governance, all that aspect, bringing communities together. You might have the very highly technical block producer. You might have somebody that might offer a different angle, like such as us. We're more of a, of a bigger picture. We try to align ourselves with just the overall philosophy and where is this going to be in a few years, and how do we get there? Where do we need to start initially? We start in the private sector, and how do we do that? And what type of economic models need to exist? And seeing what even the next phase after that is, possibly, going from private sector, free market apps over to, hey, who knows, maybe, call it 5 years. Some of the scenarios that Larimer laid out in his speech of Virginia Tech, he lays out a scenario for possibly using a government, blockchain. So, from our philosophy, we have that angle. But I think the idea is taking it by layers. So the geographic diversity, going to maybe the jurisdictional, the type of hardware used, and whether it's cloud or bare metal, maybe the skill set that each one contributes, the unique value they contribute, maybe having some variety there. You might also, consider there's some exchanges that are running for block production. So, you might want a few of those in there. And, each one does publish. You want to make sure you check off a few check marks to make sure that they're doing what they should do as far as transparency. For example, EOS Go has been very helpful in aggregating some of the requirements. Right now, I think there's eight check marks, and each one of those check marks involves the block producer contributing either, certain data. Maybe you have to disclose your position on certain things. For example, the vote buying. You might have to lay out how you will be contributing from a community benefit standpoint. About us. Here's a couple links to us. Make sure that we're legitimate. So there's many angles to it. I think it's not a one thing. I think everybody should be knowledgeable. That's the most important thing, because right now, if you were to ask somebody who they feel is a good blocker, they might just think of who they might have heard on Twitter, or maybe the local meetup people. But I encourage everyone to do a full analysis. Look at all of them, not just the ones that come to mind. Might be a handful, maybe call it 10 of them that you can name off the top of your head. But how about the other? Right now there's about 100 and close to 170. Look at them all. Learn about each one. If you're, voting comes at a cost, not necessarily a monetary cost, but an effort and you have to go through the staking process, and you might consider that an opportunity cost. If you're staked, then you can't transfer whatever. So they do have a barrier to voting, and the whole idea there is because they want people that vote to be informed and have a passionate vote, not necessarily just a vote based on, hey, cool, look, I can press a button, right? It doesn't cost me any effort. Any, meeny, miny, mo. They want people to really inform themselves. And I do encourage everyone to look at aggregated databases of block producers, and look at them all and really ask yourself, what matters from your position, aside from those top points that we hit on. Look at their unique angle. How are they providing value? There's some large areas in Asia. You might want some strong VPs there that are spreading the word there. There's just many things to look at. I think it all starts with just informing yourself, making sure that when you vote, it's not just from, hey, I remember 6 people. Rather, look through them all, make a good decision. And by the way, I'm expecting another project hopefully here before June to come out that that aggregates the block producers in a different way than the BP.EOSGO does. So it would be a second database, and maybe that one is even going to live on the blockchain. And that's the one that's been circulating for fundraising. I think it's going to be called. It's not coming to mind. But anyway, I'll shoot you the link if you want to add it to your the YouTube video. But it's going to be another project that allows you to look through the block producers and make an informed decision.
Yeah, I think as much information as we can get out there, and that sounds like a great project about ways to research the block producers easily is going to be really important, and as much information as possible as people can go through and figure out, because one of the things you mentioned there that I think is a really important concept is just diversity as a whole. Not just we talked about government, infrastructure, all those different ways, but then just as who are the actual people? What are they adding? A diversity in skill sets. So you have some that are good, just community advocates. You have some that are technical. You have some that are good leaders, etc. So that's one for me to think about as well. That's but I think that the key here is diversity, because for one, we want to be able to represent a global community, which is a key to is diversity, but almost or possibly more important is anti-fragility of the chain. We have to be very strong and resilient and that's the main goal, because we're trying to build something really impressive here. And I believe that the staking has been removed, possibly for the voting. I feel like they removed it because there was a little bit of a flaw in the game theory where, so if we have staking and there's this cost, you tie up your tokens to vote, essentially a whale can come in with, say, 100 million votes. They can use those 100 million votes to sway the voting, but then they could make it at no cost to them, because on the open market, they could then short EOS. And so they would be holding long and shorting at the other end, essentially making it, they wouldn't be experiencing the opportunity cost of basically their tokens being stuck. They'd be at a zero net gain, was the way that I understand it. So it would actually enable a whale to play the system a little bit harder if staking was involved with the voting.
Interesting.
That's the way that I understand it. I'm just a guy on the internet, but but I think that's a recent change. If I
interesting, yeah. So I'm interested to see more details about that. I could imagine that scenario, but so you're saying the reason why that the staking might no longer be required is to make sure that market manipulation is not a vulnerability?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'd have to dig into that one. That's interesting. So
when we get into voting, I mean, there's so many. You can go down a rabbit hole on just voting itself, and how do we, for one, educate, and how do we get the smaller votes to actually come out and participate, or do they just pool their votes with a place that they trust?
Sure.
So, I mean, that's a whole talk in itself. But,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how that one plays out. I know there's, initially they came out very strong for that, the requirement of having a barrier to vote, to make sure that you scrape out just the people that are voting, without the right information behind it.
Yeah.
So if that gets reverted, then it brings up the whole question is, how about that issue that was aimed to be solved in the first place by the staking? But the Block One team is very smart. They have great people. Whatever they roll out, even if it's imperfect, as the beauty of part of the reason that EOS doesn't rely on code 100%. It's not perfect. So whatever the code might be issued, if that's not the right formula, the people can still vote without having to hard fork in order to change a lot of these mechanisms. So, it doesn't rely on getting it right the first time, which is one nice thing.
That is really comforting thought, is that right now we're trying to come out with the very best that we can possibly have. It's like when you write your first iteration of an app that you put out into the app marketplace, and then everyone comes in, starts using it, and they break it, and then you come out and you fix it along the way. And that's how EOS, I'm hoping, is going to operate, is we come out good enough where it's strong and moving forward, and then as these little tweaks can be made, it's been built to be agile. So exactly. That's one of the best parts about it.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, without having a hard fork.
Without some contentious hard fork. Yeah, exactly. It's evolving quickly. So I wanted to quickly let the people know a little bit about your story, because you have just a fantastic story, man. You're like you're kind of the American dream, and I think that's really cool. So Caesar, your family, or your father, came from Spain, and he was part of the Spanish, or he fled Spain because of the Spanish Revolution in the 30s, which they're still having drama with now. Interesting enough. Fled to Mexico, where your family's from, and then as a youngster you had some tragedies, and you had to leave Mexico. And you ended up in the States as a young kid, and just living in a small apartment with all your siblings, and figuring it out, basically coming out of poverty and coming up through all kinds of tough entrepreneurship and successes. And I mean, if you want to speak about that a little bit, you can.
Absolutely. Thank you. So my father did leave Spain with nothing, as a young kid, and they ended up in Mexico, and from nothing he built himself wealth in Mexico. And my recollection of my father before he passed, he passed when I was about 6 or 7, was just wealth. I mean, he came very poor with nothing from Spain, but he built himself. He ended up building a factory that made bed cushions and became very successful. And I remember, and maybe that's why I'm a pilot, I remember flying around in a plane that he had hired pilots and chauffeurs, and and he began getting sick. And Mexico, there was just not so much ways to preserve. Bottom line is that some of his employees might have done something shady there, and ultimately, when he passed, my family and I didn't inherit anything. So we went from a memory of wealth and private planes and whatnot to nothing. And that's when we came to the U.S. and we came to the U.S. In poverty. Really, from the stories my mother tells me, is that we just sort of said, hey, let's scrape enough money to get to the U.S. We had a visa from tourism, and ultimately we came to the U.S. I became naturalized citizen, and we just started from scratch. But one interesting thing that to me is a very powerful realization is that in my mind, I had the memory of wealth just embedded in my head, as I would recall memories and say, wow, what a difference in life from my older memories to now, where like you said, we were a bunch of siblings cramped in a little tiny apartment. We would all pitch in, if you had spare change from something, you'd throw it in a little, for milk can to make sure we had milk. And, in my head, I never forgot the experience of having experienced a wealth, or the memory of experiencing wealth. And that alone was my driving factor. And as soon as I graduated high school, I just went for my own business. I said, hey, I need to get some of this lifestyle back that I experienced. And I started an insurance agency when I was, fresh out of high school, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just said, sweet, let me do this. And I sort of winged it. I went to some real estate office and said, hey, can I use this desk? Ultimately, navigated the licensing part of it. I got some help from other insurance brokers that were willing to guide me. Ultimately, ended up starting the business, and hey, I was selling insurance, and I was like, awesome. My first step towards building a business, and long story short, that insurance business grew. I ended up shifting online, generating leads, and the lead generation for insurance became a business in itself, became very lucrative. I sold my insurance agency, then grew the lead generation business. I grew that to the point where it was quite profitable. We were doing, 10,000 leads a month, getting, upwards of $30 per lead. So it was a very lucrative business. We ended up getting acquired. And, that was my first experience regaining wealth. But reflecting on that, I said, what is the difference between somebody that never experienced wealth in the first place to want to get it back versus somebody that's just never had it? They don't have that desire to get it back because they never experienced it. So to me, it was quite a realization how powerful, the power of thought, where, in my mind, I said, well, I have to get this experience back that I remember. And that alone led me to just take risks and continue, and the story I gave you sounds, like everything went well, but I had some major lows. I had partner steal and do fraud. And at one point I was in some major debt, but I just kept going and going and going. And the only driver, as I reflect, was having experienced wealth in the first place and saying, hey, why not? Why not try to regain some of this? So reflecting on that, how come just any ordinary person can't convince themselves that they need to be somewhere? Why can't somebody just put a picture in their head of where they want to be, without having to rely on a memory, rather than just, let me envision what I want to do and where I want to be and go chase that. And that's where I am today is, I try to envision certain things where I'd like to see, and it's not solely a personal benefit thing, but, as we were talking earlier, is, this whole blockchain movement, for example, is, I have a son that's 10, and I'd like to see him in a world where, where society functions with transparency and is understandable, and maybe there's all sorts of there's easy ways to find jobs, like we were talking earlier, or, just so many services out there that are that are decentralized in a community created project. So that is my vision that's driving me today, by realizing, hey, if you paint a vision in your head and you live every day towards trying to get to that vision, then it's just really replicating what I did as a child, trying to reach that dream that I had. And now, I realize the power of thought. And there's many books about this. There's, one interesting thing, and this sort of dives into a different topic, which is a whole other conversation. But recently I'm seeing that from and this kind of gets into the woo-woo world, but if on the science level, on quantum mechanics and quantum physics, they're proving that certain elements don't exist until you observe them. So to me, that might be proof that reality is a result of what you're observing, your observation can become a reality. And I know this gets into the whole mysterious world, but to me, I think eventually the science world will be able to prove that the power of thought manipulates reality. So that's a side hobby for me. I like to, I love to think, and I'm quite introverted, where my idea of just a pastime or R&R is just to allow myself to explore just thoughts and just the things that seem a little unusual to discuss in a social setting is, like if you're at a bar and you start talking about creating reality from thought, they're, like, what? But it's my hobby. I like to ponder what might be considered unusual to think about, and just asking those questions that might be considered, odd or whatnot. But it's a whole other interesting concept from a personal motivation to trying to, for example, you one day you probably thought, hey, I can picture myself doing a YouTube channel, and by that, it led you to create a reality for yourself, and here you are. And I think the same thing applies for anybody that wants to put their mind to something, create their own reality in their head, and then just follow whatever steps are necessary to get to that reality.
Yeah, and to kind of tie together what you said there for me to see if I understand it. And it sounds like, so you had this, going back, you had this vision as a child, and you as having wealth and what it was like. So you had these deep-seated emotions inside you, and also this really clear picture of what it was like. And so when you came and then you started to struggle and you started to build your life back, mm-hmm. you had an anchor, something that you had, this goal that you knew you could achieve, and there wasn't a reason necessarily why not. And so you had these thoughts and beliefs that through all these struggles and these tough times in the businesses, you were able to keep going because you had such a clear vision.
Exactly.
Now, when we're coming into EOS and we're coming into being a block producer and coming into the whole ecosystem, you know how important that vision and those emotions are. Mm-hmm. And now you're taking it far enough where you can create those for yourself. Mm-hmm. And now they're not necessarily created around wealth either. They're created around building a better future for your son, which gives its own really powerful emotion.
Absolutely.
And so I see a big parallel between what you learned through struggles as a kid and what you're applying now in a really intentional manner, and taking that really powerful thing that you have and putting it towards the good of the EOS community and the good of the world, possibly. It's what a really cool thing. And again, this is why I'm such a big fan of EOSocal, because I love the vision. I love what you guys are doing, and I totally believe in it. So very cool, man.
Thank you. Yeah, cool. I think it's, it's one of those things where I love waking up and coming to the office every day, because it's, like we were saying earlier, it's the mix of, hey, maybe I can continue making a little bit of money. I can fulfill, my desires. I could also help, bring these visions to reality, a future where blockchain just improves the lives of everyone. There's a book called Abundance by Peter Diamandis that speaks of a future where everything's abundant. Everything's free. There's less of a struggle. So in order to your comfort level could be achieved much easier. And I think blockchain is the pathway to that scenario. I think there's this tremendous waste in general. All the spending that's going on that's just going to waste. All the spending, for example, all the military interventions, whether we agree with them or not, that was trillions of dollars that could have rebuilt the U.S. 3-4 times over. It could have been used to just improve the lives of many people. Not only in the U.S., but instead of using that money to in a destructive way, that could have been put to efficient use. And my hopes is that by being here, helping push this whole initiative, it's such an early world in blockchain that right now everybody that's in it is trying to make it a reality. So to me, I hope that by coming here every day and waking up, getting to work, that I am helping push everybody towards a vision of abundance and a better world, not only for my son, which of course he'll be part of it when I'm gone, and a couple outcomes is if I get to I always think of speaking of how I like to think, I think of the day where I'm getting ready to leave the world, right? And I sit there and go, I put myself in that scenario and go, okay, what do I regret? And I go, okay, did I take care of my son? Yeah, I took care of him. Did I contribute to the world? Yeah, I did. I helped. I helped bring the whole blockchain world to reality. I helped create products that help people. Check. So I put myself in that position and go, am I ready to go? And did I not check something back? Well, then the reality is I'm not there yet. So I have a chance to make sure I check all those things off before I am on my deathbed. Mm-hmm. So that's the beauty of it, and it's fun and it's fulfilling. And at the same time, if we can generate some income while we're at it, then that is my happy place. Keeps me waking up happily every day.
Absolutely. Well, you and EOSocal, you guys have my full support. I love the project. It's fantastic to have you on the show here, and I'm sure within this ecosystem we'll cross paths many times. And I'd love to have you back on again, maybe after the mainnet launch and we've got things going. And I would love to follow up and see how you guys are doing.
Very cool.
Yeah. Before we end it here, did you have any parting notes or anything that you feel like we didn't touch on that you'd like to hit on?
Nothing in specific other than, just I want to say thanks to everybody that is part of this, not only on the EOS front, but everybody that's helping develop this movement of decentralization, accountability, to empower humanity, as Larimer says, to secure life, liberty, and property, and to push society towards a better world. Everyone that's contributing, including yourself. Big thanks to everybody, and thank you very much for having us and for your support. And certainly hope to catch you, at a meetup or see you again here on the channel. And keep in touch.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Much love to you, crypto community as a whole, EOS, Steam, and every other beautiful coin out there. We're in something really big together. Much love to you, Caesar. I appreciate your time today and what you're doing for the EOS community specifically. And until next time, my crypto friends.
See you guys.
Cool, man.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is just